Knowing your way around the developer docs is super important when working with APIs because otherwise you just don't know any of the details around the API endpoints and what you can do and how you can authenticate with the APIs. So whenever you get started, you want to go and search for a particular API. So let's search for like front API docs. And you can see here the first result is the correct result. You click in here and you're welcome to our developer portal. A lot of this information here in the left-hand nav is about how to get started with the core API. So you might want to read this overview section, and it kind of outlines what's available through the documentation. Authentication is a section that will normally tell you how to get your API key. So Front offers a couple authentication methods, OAuth and API tokens. So these would be the topics that you would read about to learn where to go inside Front to get an API key. Once you've got your API key and you know kind of the fundamentals of how to use the API, so sometimes you might want to read through some of these fundamentals courses. But ultimately, when you want to look for your API endpoint, that's what's known as the reference documentation. So you'll normally see something called an API reference. And we linked to it here on the left nav. We also linked to it up here in the top nav. So when you click API reference, our menu on the left-hand nav starts to show you all the different API endpoints for the core API. So you can see everything from teams to signatures to contacts. And this is what we've been working with earlier in the course, where you can see information about specific API endpoints. So we can repeat this process with Stripe's API and just search for Stripe API docs. And Stripe API reference comes back up. So when we click in there, it looks like they've got introduction to their API. They tell you the base URL that you may want to hit. So, which is an interesting thing because sometimes API endpoints do not show you that base URL. So that is like the kind of like you can think of the domain part of the URL. So you may have to look through the docs at times to find what that is. And sometimes it changes for each customer. So you may have a custom one for your instance. But and you scroll down here, their authentication section is here. Stripe API uses API keys, and it looks like they have a more detailed topic about those API keys and how to acquire them and how to use them. So now that we have some basic understanding of that, I would maybe look for the resources that they have. And so it seems like they've got different types of resources. These are their core resources, which seem to give you information back about your Stripe balance, some disputes, things like that. Refunds, for example, are down here. So if I click into there, it looks like they've got a create a refund API endpoint. And so, it's laid out differently from how Front's API docs are laid out, but every company is going to have slight differences between their layouts. But essentially, this create a refund API endpoint, you can see here that they've got the URL, but the URL does not include the full path. That was that base URL we saw at the beginning of it. You do see it here in their request example, so you can kind of discern that it's api.stripe.com is the base URL. But like I mentioned, a lot of times APIs don't show you that full one. This is a post request. They've got an example of the response in here. So you can start seeing, just every API documentation is going to look differently, but you probably want to search for those docs, look at the overview sections, look at the authentication sections, and then dive into the API reference to really see what's possible.